Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss some more interesting analysis on the sort of voters that the Conservatives need to focus on if they're going to reverse their dire polling position. It's an incredibly useful tool to let us better judge the Tories' efforts to turn things around. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the polling continues to be pretty bad news for Sunak and his party. YouGov are now giving Labour a 24-point lead. So how can the Conservatives realistically turn things around? In terms of who you need to aim at, I mean, you don't put your hopes in trying to attract entirely new voters rallying to your banner. It's really hard to persuade people who don't normally vote to suddenly start voting. The focus has to be on those who are already going to vote. They voted the last election. They sort of intend to vote for the next election, but they're not sure who they want to vote for. And it's quite useful to know who those people are, because normally when I'm looking at what the Conservatives are doing, or when you look at what any particular political party is doing, it's quite common for people to think they're making a strategic error because they think, well, that'll be upsetting all of these people. You've got to try and understand, in a first past the post system, you're not trying to get the approval of everyone. You can't. You're not even necessarily trying to get the approval of the majority. First past the post doesn't respect the majority. You're trying to get the approval of relatively small groups of voters. And so who are they? Who do you try to attract? I mean, being frank, people who voted for any of the alternative parties at the last election are very unlikely to vote Conservative next time when things are way worse. Some of them will. It's just the nature of things. But really don't go chasing after those. There's also not much point trying to win back former Conservative voters who've decided to say flip to Labour or someone else, or just to tactically vote for whoever will be the most likely to beat the Conservative candidate. Once you've lost a voter to another party, it's really hard to get them back, at least anytime soon. Where the Conservatives are going to get the best yield on their efforts is by targeting the Conservative voters who don't know who they're going to vote for next time. These are the people who are likely to vote. They certainly intend to vote. They are prepared to vote Conservative because they did do. They're just not sure for the next time. As I say, the fact that they did vote Conservative means Sunak has a chance, right? After all, given the current state of the country, if these people are still intending to vote but they're not sure who for, if they're even thinking of voting Conservative, despite everything that's going on in the country, yes, absolutely, the Tories have got a chance to win their votes with the right pitch. And polling currently suggests that Sunak can only count on 43% of the 2019 Tory voters voting for his party at the next election. But there are another 23% who say they don't know. So that's proportionally a lot of voters to work on winning over. So who are they? Well, unless the Conservative strategists are even worse than I give them credit for, they will know, and they'll have known for some time. I mean, political parties poll for this sort of information all the time. They need to know what sort of voter to focus on, and they need to know what that type of voter wants to listen to. But they obviously don't share their internal polling with me. But YouGov has produced some polling which has been published, which gives us a rough idea of the sorts of voters the Tories have the best chance of winning over. And in terms of the single largest group of voters who voted Conservative in 2019, but now don't know, are described as women who are a bit older, not graduates, own their own home. Now, this isn't the only group, but it is the largest group. And so if the Tories are serious about the next election, definitely a demographic they should be aiming at. So the question is, are they? Well, yes, in a way. The good news for the Tories is that a good half of this group seem to own their own homes mortgage-free. So if we again to shrink the circle a little bit, to identify what is nonetheless a significant group of these don't know but formerly Tory voters, mostly living in the south of England, Tory heartlands, tick box there. Homeowners, cracking, tick box there. Mortgage free though, they've paid off the mortgage, tick box there. Women tends not to be graduates. So if we look at this specific group of mortgage free home owners, possibly retired. Then we can see how the Tories actually do stand a good chance if they're focused. Because, for example, if we think about some of the major issues affecting people right now, higher interest rates, well, that's not upsetting them because they're more likely to be savers than borrowers. They're mortgage free. They probably don't have all the debts. High interest rate, they actually like high interest rates. Inflation is of much more concern to them. So Rishi Sunak banging on about inflation at the exclusion of all else can actually appeal to this group because they do care about that. The analysis suggests that more people with mortgages are switching to Labour than saying don't know. That doesn't surprise me. The much higher mortgage payments as people come off their fixed rate is not going to endear them to the Conservatives. You know, if you look at this analysis, realise that the Tories will have this data themselves and actually in more detail, and that have been collecting it for a lot longer. And then consider the way the Tories have been trying to present their policies. You could see how they will absolutely have this group of voters in mind. Mortgage-free, home-owning women at or close to retirement age. You know, for this group, inflation by far and away the most important economic marker. They don't want low interest rates. As I said, they're debt-free. If they've got savings, they actually want high interest rates. They're less likely to care about wage increases. Many of them are retired or close enough to it. So whenever I call out Sunak for focusing only on inflation and how actually he's just upsetting those who are struggling with the cost of living, which is not just about inflation, you know, so even as inflation falls, some of these people are still experiencing a lower standard of living. Well, if there's one group who are only interested in inflation, it is these debt-free retired homeowners. So does it mean that after all, the Tories are being strategic? Well, yes and no. This group of voters is definitely a rich seam to target, but it's not enough to avoid losing the election. But it might depend on what their aims are. Like if the Conservatives have abandoned the idea of actually winning the next election and they just want to avoid a complete wipeout, while still ignoring the basic job of government, then yes, you can see how Tories will focus a lot on these target voters as a good one to prioritise. They can carry on screwing the country over in 100 different ways and this group will never notice. And there might just be enough of them to save quite a few of their threatened seats in the south. That being said, there are still some oddities. There's nothing about this group of voters that would find anything appealing in Sunak's anti-net zero or anti-20 mile an hour zone drives. You know, he seemed to make a big thing of these after the Uxbridge by-election win, even though it was obviously a niche issue for that one place in that one point of time. Yet it still changed his entire policy approach in those areas based on it. That suggests that, as I keep saying, strategy's probably got very little to do with this thinking. Like in theory, the HS2 move you could say is more strategic. Again, if you keep these voters in your mind, mostly living in the south of England, retired or close to retirement, own their own homes, but they've paid off the mortgage. You know, these sort of people. Yeah, you cancel. The big news about cancelling HS2 was cancelling that investment in the north of England, right? Well, you cancel a project intended to improve productivity in the north and then redistribute funds to the south of England. Well, that might appeal to some people in the south of England, say, the Tory heartlands, which is where most of these voters live. But the fact that he messed it up, and many people now realise that actually it's not money for the south of England after all, the money just doesn't exist, speaks of a lack of strategy. If I were to speculate, I would guess this. I would suggest this is probably like a coincidence. It makes sense that the Conservatives target those voters who voted for them last time but aren't sure now. They are the easiest to persuade, but I'm not sure I see a coherent strategy for attracting these specific voters. I think they've just identified part of this large group, the mortgage-free older women, and have decided that their economic vandalism is less upsetting to those voters, potentially not upsetting at all, and so has made them their target voter, rather than, I don't think what's happened here is the Conservatives have gone, oh, this is a large target voter group. We should do things specifically to focus on them. I think it's just serendipity. Finally, just to add a little bit of context. So if you fancy reading the YouGov article yourself, At one point, they say that of those who voted Conservative in 2019, 12% will now vote Labour. Now, those are really valuable voters because that's worth 2 votes, remember. If someone who did vote Conservative last time doesn't at the next election, that's great for Labour. That's like an extra vote because that reduces the Conservative tally. But if they directly switch from the Conservative to Labour, that's worth 2 votes because the Conservative tally comes down by 1 and theirs goes up by 1. So those are really important voters, but it's by no means the majority. It's by no means this massive group of people. You're not going to see a massive sea change of voting switching from Conservative to Labour. But 12% still decent. And YouGov say that it's decent, but they say it's not as good as the 16% who, ahead of the 1997 election, said that they were going to switch from the Conservatives to Blair's Labour, right? And I do think they missed out some context here, because you might imagine, okay, well, the conversion rate's not as good as in 1997. But if you look back at the polling from just before 97, if you go to February 1996, just over a year before the general election, which may well be the case now, Labour had a beast of a lead over John Major's Tories. It was 31 points. Came down quite sharply after that, but just for that shining moment, 31-point lead. Proper Liz Truss territory. But if you look at the breakdown of voting intention, 97% of people who were going to vote said that they would vote for either Labour, the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats. 97% of people saying they were going to vote for one of those 3 parties. That is just 3% saying they'd vote for a different party. Now, fast forward to now, a year before the next general election, it's 81% saying they'd vote for one of those same 3 parties. So we've gone from, in 1996, 3% saying they'd vote for parties that weren't Labour, Conservatives or Lib Dems, to 19% saying they'd vote for a different party. So it's worth noting, when comparing voting intention stats now and in 1996, that in 1996 people felt that they had less choice. So it's way harder now for Labour to attract as many votes. So comparisons need to be considered in that context. Labour cannot expect the same sort of lead in the polls. But with our first past the post system, they don't need it. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.